All right, good morning, everyone. I am Wesley Stefanik. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Association of Realtors. Thank you for joining us today for our March Hot Topic session. This month, we welcome Olivia Allred from the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. A few housekeeping items before we begin. That chat box is open, so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in there. If you don't like the way your screen looks right now, there is a button at the top right of the screen that says View. You can adjust what you're looking at. I do want to let everybody know that our next Hot Topic session is April 3rd at 10 a.m. The topic that day will be reasonable accommodations under the Fair Housing Act. So if you have any interest in that topic or you think it might be valuable to your clients, just look for the link in our Fast Facts newsletter and you can sign up for that. So with that, let's get started. Again, I'd like to first welcome Olivia Allred, who is the Education and Communication Specialist within the Division of Watershed Stewardship, Wetland Monitoring, and Assessment Programs at DENREC. Olivia is actually, over the last few years, has held a few continuing education classes for our members. And if you're ever interested in taking a deeper dive into wetlands, if you will, keep an eye out for those classes. And I'm sure Olivia can talk a little more about those. But today's session will be just a general primer about Delaware's wetlands, and we hope by the end of it you get a better understanding of the wetlands in Delaware and the resources you can utilize in your day-to-day business. So Olivia, welcome, and feel free to take it away.
Great, thanks, Wes. Let me get my screen up. We have a PowerPoint as usual, as we're all used to. Can everybody see that so far?
Yep.
We're good? Okay. Great. All right, everyone. Yeah, like Wes said, my name is Olivia Allred, and I work for DENREC. You might have heard it on the news or seen it on Facebook. That's our abbreviation. It's the Department of Natural Resources for the state of Delaware, and I work in the Wetlands program. I'm the education and communications person, so I'm just the outreach guru, and I kind of connect all the science and research out to the public or on our web pages, social media, and kind of help translate some of that data and all the good work that our environmental scientists do. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And like Wes said, we're gonna get our feet wet in terms of wetlands and really how that can relate to you guys in your profession. And this is very informal. We'll take questions at the end, but if you think of something along the way, jot it down or put it in the chat box and we can chit chat. So with that, we will get going. I like to, let me get there we go. I like to give people a little bit of a background on who DENREC is. You may have heard of us before. A lot of people know Parks and Recreation or Fish and Wildlife, but this is kind of who we are in a nutshell. And all those words are some of the things that we do with our natural and cultural resources within the state. So the governor appoints our secretary, and that's the person who kind of represents all of us and all of our work. And these are the different divisions, just so everybody can see. So the Gold Star, you'll hear from us today. I work within the Watershed Stewardship Division, and we do all sorts of different stuff. We're a bit of a smaller division, but coastlines, watersheds, wetlands, farmland, that kind of thing. We're integrated into all that. So that's a bit of a very condensed description and image of what DENREC does. And like I said, some of you may be familiar. Now, for my program, it's a mouthful, Wetland Monitoring and Assessment Program. I always say I just work for Delaware Wetlands, so I'll let you kind of browse through those bullets, but that's the gist of what my program does. I like to say that we're a small but mighty group. So in the picture over on the screen, there's actually only 3 of us. We have a team of 3 right now, so we do quite a bit of work. We work coast to coast, edge to edge, every county. And really our main goal is to track the health and acreage of wetlands across Delaware. And you'll see through the presentation kind of how that translates for you guys, because it's a large portion of the land area of the state. So we do lots of ATIONs, restoration, preservation, education, stabilization. That's kind of what we do. And then we collaborate and share that information with other people. So we're not the permitting department. We're not a land holding entity like state parks is, but we really work towards just getting information out there for professionals and the public alike, and even other divisions of DENREC, just so they know what's going on with wetlands in the state. So that's us in a nutshell, what our program does. Okay, nitty gritty. Some of you may know what a wetland is, but to put it simply, it's where land and water meet. And to be a wetland, you have to have three main principles, three main characteristics, which we'll kind of take a dive into, because as you probably know, when you visit a property, you might want to look for some of these factors or some of these scientific kind of characteristics within that land area. So first, you need hydrology, right? You have to have water on some part of the surface for some part of the year. You also have hydric soils. So what that means is waterlogged soils, soils that are saturated, and they have to be saturated for a certain time of year as well. And then that last one, hydrophytic plants. So these are species that are really well adapted to grow in wet areas, and with Delaware being, very close to the water table below sea level, we have lots of different adaptations in plants that we see that live near our coastlines and also live inland. So that's a really neat factor about wetlands, is that they kind of provide that for both types of habitats, and we'll get into that as well. But that's really as simple as it gets. You just need those three things to be categorized as a wetland on the surface. Number one, hydrology. So believe it or not, you just have to have water at or above the surface for at least 2 weeks of the year. And what's interesting about this, if you look at that picture, is that it's hard to tell at different points of the year if that wetland is there or not. Usually in our state, in classification, they are wetter in the winter and the spring, so this time of year, and then they're drier in the summer and the fall. So that image was taken at the same site at different points of the year, fall and spring, and you can see in the fall, there's not a drop of water on that surface. You have some indicators, maybe with those moss lines on the tree, but then you flash forward to spring and you've got a couple inches of water on the surface. So it's hard to tell, especially if you're looking at property, you're trying to help clients, what might actually be there for some part of the year. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at spaces to see what kind of water's on the surface. Hydric soils. Luckily for us in our state, they're usually gray with flecks of orange. That's a little picture of kind of like a soil sample of what we might take a look at. We might grab it, see if it has clay, if it has the flecks of orange, just from iron, that kind of thing. And that's how we kind of get a good idea of if that place is a wetland or not. The key thing about this is that it has to be wet long enough during the growing season to show that physical indicator. So that's a caveat where it gets a bit more scientific. And that's why we have great scientists in our program that kind of help us determine, this may have clay in it, but is it absolutely a wetland? This may have orange in it, but is it absolutely a wetland? So that's kind of how soils work. And like I said, I'm not a scientist by trade, but we all kind of work together through these scientific methods in the field to determine what's going on underneath the surface. And the last one, hydrophytic plants, water-loving plants. And these adaptations come in a lot of different ways, lots of different shapes and forms, but I threw some up on the screen so you get a good idea. Salt glands, so that is probably something you see at the beach a lot, right, on the coastlines. In our marshes, they actually sweat the salt out, much like we do, in order to survive in that area. So that's a really unique characteristic about that specific type of plant, but lots of them have that adaptation. And we also have air channels. So these are actually channels coming up through the plant in order for them to simply get air, right? They need that to survive. We know the basics of living things. So that plant has changed its lifestyle and figured out how to adapt in that condition. And then the one on the right, you've got roots, right? That's a bald cypress knee. Some of us may be familiar. That actually is growing out of the ground in order to get what it needs. And that's a really good image of how high that water might come up. So if you notice that moss line, that's a saturated area, right? We see some water in the background, but we kind of have a good idea based on that plant growing upwards of how high that water goes in that area. So you don't have to be a wetland scientist to identify wetlands, but it's good to know kind of those main three factors starting out, especially if you're helping clients or landowners kind of navigate their way through the real estate world, because it's not easy, right? Looking at properties. This one I always mention. A lot of times when I ask students to draw me a picture of a wetland or a beach, this plant makes its way into that image. So this is Phragmite, European reed. And the reason I mention it is because it's very invasive. And in the couple years I've started working with real estate professionals, they have it on their properties and their clients are noticing it and maybe obstructing their view. It may be taking over a certain space, but we do have invasive Phragmite here. It gets very tall, it grows fast. And I think really for you guys, the main feature is that it can kind of take away from that recreational value or that aesthetic value on a property. So it's good to know what it is. And I feel like it kind of gives you that upper edge to help your clients kind of identify what's going on. Controlling it is hard. Takes a couple years of application to kind of get rid of. Sometimes you have to hire a contractor. It is not easy. It's not as simple as going out and just trimming it with a pair of garden shears, right? It's very thick and very dense, but I always put this on here just so you guys really stay informed, as cliche as that sounds, as to what it is and how you can kind of get rid of it. So you have your herbicides, your mowing, but like I said, it requires multiple years of effort, but put that information in your back pocket in terms of helping clients determine the plants that are on your property. So those are the three factors, right? Hydrology, soils, and water loving plants. Very basic. Next, we have our wetland types. This one is more familiar to most people, right? These are our tidal wetlands or our salt marshes. These occur along our coastlines and our shoreline. So we have where ocean bays, rivers, and streams meet the land. And they range pretty vastly, but mostly saltwater, some to rare tidal freshwater. So that means, it's being inundated with a little bit of fresh water and influenced by the tides at the same time. So it's a unique kind of space. But the main component, of course, if it's tidal, is that water is being pushed in and out daily by tidal cycles. So sometimes in our field work, you need to plan out when you're going to walk out to a certain space because it's going to have water at it at this point, but later in the day it'll be lower. So you guys, you learn that in elementary school, but it's something important to keep in mind is that the water will be fluctuating often throughout the day. And then the other important part that relates to you all is state regulation. So tidal wetlands in the state of Delaware are regulated and they are also federally regulated. So you have permitting through the state and then permitting through federal government if you want to build a dock or add an addition on your house and it's coming towards the coastline or put in a pier. That kind of stuff goes through the state and has a certain process and an order to it to get that permit. So tidal wetlands are regulated at this point, and I think some of you probably know that, but again, it's good to understand the differences. We also have wetland types. So this is the freshwater wetlands or non-tidal, right? This is our second wetland type. And mostly these are freshwater and they are found around inland areas in our state. So these are really cool, unique wetland communities. We have specific types that you can kind of dive into on our webpage, but I put some examples: coastal plain, pond, depression, big mouthful, freshwater stream. These are really awesome areas in our state that most people don't see, but we have a very wide variety of them. They're fed by rain, snow, or groundwater. So they're not fed by that tidal cycle. They're not really fed by, salt water at all. They're actually fresh water and their levels can change from season to season. So that makes it a bit more hard to identify. In terms of going out in a non-tidal or in a tidal salt marsh, we know that we're at the beach. We know we're at the bayside, right? We have those indicators, but with the water levels changing a bit more in these non-tidal types, it gets a bit harder to identify. Again, the caveat for this for you all to keep in your back pocket is that freshwater non-tidal wetlands are not regulated by the state of Delaware. There's very little regulation. So the best way to put it is if you have 400 acres or more of continuous wetlands, non-tidal wetlands, that would be regulated through the state of Delaware. Underneath that, it is not. It is regulated through the federal government, which would be the Army Corps of Engineers. But through the state, we don't have that program put in place right now. So those are the main differences between title and non-title, is that title are regulated federally and through the state, and then non-title are regulated federally but not through the state. So that's the main component to that. And that's definitely something our program is trying to make a point to say is important, and it's critical to protect these areas, because we don't want people just coming in and filling these really nice resources, especially if it's on their property. Provides a great aesthetic view, it provides a great recreational value, and we'll kind of talk about the steps to protect those areas as well. But those are the types and the main differences between the two. Where do wetlands stand? We know the types, we know what it takes to be a wetland, but what are we looking at statewide? So our latest wetland maps are from 2017, and we update them, we come out with wetland maps about every 10 years. And as it stands right now, we have almost 300,000 acres of wetlands, right? 296,351 to be exact. What's really unique about that number is that that's nearly 25% of our state. So if you look at that map that I popped up on there, I've put the tidal wetlands in lime green, which, as we guessed, are going to be further along the coastline, reaching inland here and there, but for the most part, they're along the coastline of Delaware. And then we have our non-tidal wetlands. Like I said, they're inland, they're further away from the coast. We have some bumping up next to tidal, but we have a large majority on the western half of the state. Now, what's interesting is that most people think of Delaware and they think, oh, the beaches, and I'm driving along the coastline. Most of the wetlands we have are non-tidal, so almost 60% of them. So when we talk about regulation, that's a huge amount of wetlands that are kind of at risk to do whatever you might want to do with them. And most people don't realize that. And so some of the properties that you might be encountering actually have these freshwater wetlands on them, and they have great value, but people just don't know what they look like and don't know that they're actually there. So I always pop that map up just to kind of show you where they're at and what that really looks like when you contrast them together. A couple things I'll note about the statewide map. We have something which are called unique wetland communities. This is about 5% of all wetlands in Delaware, and they fall in the non-tidal category, and they're unique, right? They have ecosystems, plants and animals, and value and services to our land and citizens that other ones might not have as much. And those can be in different pockets in those certain areas inland, and you can see kind of where those areas pop up. We've got a large amount of them, right? We have a large amount in Sussex County. We have a nice amount in the Piedmont of some of those 5%ers, and they're located off the beaten path. But I always throw that in there too, because you may encounter that on some of your properties. If you break it down by county, we have Sussex County coming in as the heavy hitter. So they have almost half of all the wetlands in the state. So we're close to the coast. We have that big pocket you can see of non-tidal wetlands down south. Don't discount the other counties, of course. So Kent County comes in around 37%, and then Newcastle at 15%. But like I said, we do have some unique wetland communities in that Piedmont area as well. But that's the county breakdown. So in terms of your profession, it's good to keep in mind, some of you may work in all 3 counties, some of you may work in 2 or 1. Just keep, again, in your back pocket so you know wetlands are there and kind of what might be going on. But it's a large chunk of our state in general, right? How do we classify them? How do we track them? So if someone's like, well, what is good and what is bad with your mapping? And so I break it down into how we calculate them. We have gains and we have losses. So all the different wetland types, we take all the watersheds and assess them and compile it all together to give you a report. And then we say, here's what we've gained over time and here's what we've lost. So we'll chat about that a little bit as well. In that 10-year period of 2007 to 2017, again, these are updated maps. It seems like a long time ago, but they're very useful. We gained 1,400 acres of wetlands. The sadder part of that is that 90% of them were man-made. And what does that look like for you all? Well, those are retention ponds. So again, that's something development, adding those areas in, they're not as good as those natural vegetated wetlands, those natural areas that perform services that we need. So though we may have gained a decent amount, 90% of them aren't coming from the place that we want them to be. Only 375 acres were vegetated, aka natural, just there going on their own. I put an image up there to kind of show you some examples of how those gains are calculated, how they're tracked. You've got agriculture, right? We have a huge agricultural based state, very important to keep track of. Development, another huge part of our state, lots of stuff going on. Your group of people especially know the ins and outs of what's going on with development. I've highlighted there, we've highlighted on some of our reports what that gain might look like as a retention pond. So it still gets calculated, but we categorize that into a certain category. Then you have restoration, which are people restoring wetlands or groups, work groups, organizations heading towards that goal. A small amount, but we want that to get larger. Industrial, that kind of thing. And then I put sources of gains on a graph, and some people are more graph based, but that's kind of how we sum up what's good in terms of what's happening with wetlands. And it gets a bit sciencey, but this is kind of the best way to interpret that. So we are having some gains. We are, as our next mapping comes out, 2017 to 2027, hopefully we'll see more in some of those areas like restoration that we really want. And maybe some lower in development as we try and educate people on the importance of those. So that's gains. That's where they stand, in a good place. And then losses. So unfortunately, in that mapping period, we lost over 3,000 acres of wetlands, right? Not where we want to see it, but we're always trying to fight the good fight. 92% of those losses were non-tidal, fresh water, which we can assume if we go back to the regulation is because they're not regulated, right? They're not regulated through the state. They're only regulated federally. So there's a bit of a disconnect and some areas we can improve in terms of management. And Sussex County, again, came in as a hard, heavy hitter, as all of you know, with the amount of development there. Sussex accounted for 2/3 of those losses, right? 2/3 of those losses. If we break it down to tidal, and in terms of what's along the coastline, 2/3 of those were due to environmental impacts, right? So that's a large amount. Environmental impacts, things that are connected to climate change and sea level rise, and some of the words, those hot topic words that we're seeing, do have a lot of impact, especially on property owners over time. If you're living along the coast, it takes one storm to clear out your area, and it takes one storm to lose your salt marsh, lose your wetlands. So those are kind of some of the losses that we're seeing in those tidal areas. So we've got development and land clearing happening for freshwater, and we've got environmental impacts happening for our saltwater, our tidal wetlands. So that's kind of the breakdown. And though that seems doom and gloom in terms of gains and losses, it's really not. We're always working to make it better. So why do wetlands matter, right? Why should we keep them around? And why do we want to prevent those losses from happening? That's a great quote. Almost anywhere you stand in the state of Delaware puts you within 1 mile of a wetland. That's anywhere you stand. So even if you're up north, even if you're in, especially like you're in downtown Wilmington, you still have wetlands there. We have a wetland park up there. It's quite vast. It is literally almost a quarter of the state. And something we like to do is break down for people property ownership. And this is kind of now how you can start to integrate wetlands into your profession. You have about 20-25% of land area are wetlands. You break that down into who owns what, only 20% are state and federally owned. So it's quite a large amount left up to the rest of us, right? My property, your client's property, in protecting the wetlands that are there. 80% of them are actually privately owned. It's a huge amount, right? Very large amount. So education and just your basic understanding of what in your backyard really does go a long way in terms of protecting these resources and knowing their service value to you or to your company or your agency or whatever. And I won't read through that large one. I'm sure that number has increased. All those numbers have increased since 2018. That's a lot of jobs, that's a lot of economic value and a lot of wages. And as many of us know, more people are visiting Delaware than ever, they're moving to Delaware than ever. And a lot of industries are relying on some sort of connection to nature to thrive. It really is true. We've got kayaking businesses, real estate, restaurants, state parks. We've got wonderful nature preserves in the top 2 counties. We have byways and bicycle trails. You know, all these things are integrated into economic value, and wetlands have a huge part of it because there are so many of them. So something to keep in mind as well. Some more reasons. This is pretty important. They reduce and prevent flooding and erosion. So as you work with clients and folks who are potentially having wetlands on their property, they do provide much protection for property value and the items in your home. Wetlands act like a large sponge during big storm events and soak up all that extra water. So really without them, we don't have a line of defense, so to speak, in terms of water coming onto a property. I took some pictures there. So that's actually a picture in Kent County, the White House that's flooding. We don't want that. There are wetlands right next to it, backing up that can help with that extra saturation and soak it up. And then that other photo I worked for state parks for a number of years, that's down at the Indian River Inlet, towards the South Side campground. That happens more often than ever now. With everything going on with climate change and things moving and all those big science words, you know, that's happening more and more where roads are closed due to flooding. And wetlands play a large part in preventing that from happening. They also protect against erosion. So, and this can happen even in freshwater areas, right? Rivers and ponds, you can have some erosion on those areas as well. But those plants have extensive root systems that slow the flow of water. So you may have some flooding, you may have your water rise during high tides or storms, but those roots are there to really, again, be another line of defense to soak everything up. So another important quote that we just love saying, 1 acre of wetland can store 330,000 gallons of water to a depth of 1 foot. Very important if you're purchasing property to keep those things in mind, like I said. So flooding and erosion, reducing that. Why else? They improve water quality. So we can assume as they're draining all this water, they're almost acting like a filter, and we like to say kidneys of our watersheds. They are removing pollutants from the sediment and the land that are draining into them. Water quality benefits are extremely important, especially since we live so close to the coastline and we have such a low sea level. They're there to filter excess nutrients. And in terms of agriculture, again, we have a huge agricultural state. I mean, a large amount of production, and we have a lot of development going on. And so there's runoff, there's excess nutrients, there's harmful things that might be going into our groundwater that we don't want there. And wetlands are just that natural buffer in order to make that not happen. And that's just really important for everybody, right? They provide habitat. I love baby turtles. I think this picture speaks for itself. These are different animals and species of plants that we see in the field, but they're a critical source for plants and animals. And especially in our state, fish and shellfish production is a major component. So 80 to 85% of commercial fish rely on these types of ecosystems. You can think of our non-tidal wetlands as a nursery for a lot of young fish, and a lot of fish that people move here and visit here and buy second homes here to use, to eat, to rely on. So again, a great component. A lot of these wetlands have rare plants and animals, so some that can be endangered, critically endangered, some that you just never see. You see them certain points of the year. That has a lot of value to it. And as we all know, and this is cheesy, everything is connected, right? Everything is part of the food web and has good productivity. Wetlands are some of the most highly productive ecosystems across the globe. So something to keep in mind in terms of keeping our state looking good, keeping your business flowing, having people buy property that looks good and it's natural. People might like that a little bit more, another component to it. And this one, ecotourism and education, major industry, like I said, in our state. We all rely on natural resources in some component. A lot of us really do, working here and living here. And wetlands are a huge part of that because they are everywhere that you turn in lots of different locations throughout the state. Lots of wages and lots of recreational dollars are being centered around this type of ecosystem. And outdoor education has really expanded as we get to know these places. So we have outdoor classrooms. We have days where students come and visit wetlands that they might not ever see on their own time, or they might have in their backyard and not recognize. Those things are really important to just kind of build future stewards of the land itself, right? We want to make sure people understand what's going on. And in terms for you guys, if you understand what's going on in a backyard, you can help a potential client and build a relationship with them, knowing some of the ins and outs of this stuff. And it really does give you kind of a better edge, I think, in the professional sense of knowing the ins and outs of natural resources. And this last one, this is kind of cheesy. This is a term I call the new adventurer. New adventurers come in all different shapes and sizes. We've got people who are more outdoorsy than ever. We've got people coming to Delaware, visiting Delaware for the first time, falling in love with it. And you don't have to be an avid kayaker or work for DNREC to find that valuable. The spectrum is getting wider and wider, and I think it's important for all of us to adapt how we interact and communicate with it. And for you guys as real estate agents, you can do that. And this is a kind of a tactic to get you your boots on the ground, so to speak, of helping someone make that decision, whether again it's their first time visiting, or they're looking for a second home, or they're looking for their retirement property, right? These are all things that matter in terms of people's futures. So we talked about why they're important, and then we put this slide on here because this is kind of what you guys might be seeing in your future, right? You might actually find a wetland on a property now that you know about them. And you're like, okay, there's wetlands on here. You guys know better about non-disclosure and agreements and this and that. Most of the time, hopefully that's on there, right? I'm pretty sure that you have to have that on there, but these are some little tips and tricks of the trade. You know, you need to know the flooding history on the property and inside the home. You want to have some sort of clause for wetlands inspections potentially with some of your clients. You need full disclosure, as I said. And educating yourself on when you need a permit or when you don't, regulated or exempt, is extremely important, because people might start asking you, well, can I fill this? Can I build that? Can I put a septic near this? Can I do that? I mean, these are questions you guys get more than me. But it's really important to kind of understand on the ground level, especially for wetlands, what that might look like, what answers you can provide. And then, of course, if there's wetlands on a property and you want to find out more and you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you need to hire a qualified wetland delineator. So that's someone who comes to the property and actually spells it out for you to a T. What's there? What is the acreage? Where you need to go next for getting permits? And that helps you and your client, again, build and maintain that relationship and make good choices for their future, right? That's really what it is. The overarching picture that I try and we try and educate people is, you know, building on a wetland is not your best choice. We don't want people's property value to go down. We don't want people to be shocked when they buy a house in a certain time of year, and then later in that year, they've got a huge puddle and they don't know what it came from, right? We want to make sure people have the answers that they need and they're actually making good decisions and spending their money wisely. They're entrusting you to help you make that decision. So I think all these things can kind of be connected a little bit more together, which is important. These are just some other tips and tricks of the trade. So as you guys, maybe you don't take anything away from this presentation, you don't remember anything, totally fine. What are some everyday things in your profession that you can give yourself the upper edge on in terms of helping people manage their land? We've got Delaware Livable Lawns. This is a great group that is really helpful with the idea of a lawn, how that image should be kind of shifting a little bit. We don't need this manicured space. You don't have to have this property with this manicured space. If you want that, what are some good ways we can make it more natural for you? If you're in a neighborhood and you love it, these are small and easy changes that are very useful for you guys, and kind of like, conversating with people, getting people to open up. I'm sure in your profession you meet people who talk too much and talk a little, and it's good to have kind of a conversation starting point when you go to a property. We also have rain gardens. Some of you may be familiar. This reduces the amount you have to mow. So I think this is great for folks who are looking for a retirement property. They're looking to have that little extra value in their front yard, and a little less yard work. Planted buffers. So this is if you want to get into a little bit more of what's native, what's not. You guys can even do that on your own if you just want to look up plants. So when you go to a property, you can show people, hey, this is a native plant, it's supposed to be here. Maybe keep that in your yard. I think this is a little bit more valuable than this, or things like that. And you get more critters, you get more butterflies and bees and all the good stuff that you want to see. These two are more for, I would say, heavy hitters. People who are looking to do more intense work on a property and really save the value if they're struggling with something that they already see. Living shorelines are a new tactic to stabilize shorelines, to stabilize our coasts in marine habitats. It's basically using some more natural materials and items to prevent erosion. So that can be from boat wake, that can be near your dock or your house or your client's house. This is something kind of that Delaware is really working hard at, and it's a large collective of us. But that's something that you can look into as well. And private property wetland restoration. We do have lots of people retiring, farm owners that are not working anymore, and they want to restore a wet, unproductive cropland or large wet area that could be good for restoration. So those are some resources, and I can share this with Wes as well, that you guys can look back and kind of dig into. You never know who you might run into in your professional field. You never know what people are looking for. So it's important to know some of those things in your back pocket as well. All right, we've covered a lot. This, I would say, is our bright and shiny item. So we have a really good tool that I think for real estate professionals is great to use, especially if you have your phone on you, which I know you guys do, or an iPad, or you're just trying to give your client that extra something, seal the deal. You can use it. I guess that's a term that you can use. Our program has a wetland toolbox, and this basically takes the mapped wetlands that are in Delaware, and you can find it on any property throughout the state. So to reiterate, mapped doesn't mean regulated, but it's mapped. So you can kind of get a good idea of what type it is. And now that you've chatted with me today during this webinar, you have a good idea of the values of those areas, whether they're freshwater or saltwater. And you can take a really good look at what's going on in someone's backyard and get it down to a T, look at that whole property. So if you Google Delaware Wetland Toolbox, it's called the Delaware Freshwater Wetland Toolbox, but it does have both title and non-title. If you Google search that, it should be one of the first few links. And the screen will look like this in the beginning. And actually, if you go down to where it says find wetlands on your property, it has little directions as well. You can put in that exact address and it will zoom down to it. And when you do that, you can click on it and it'll highlight the type, if it's title, non-title, what's going on there. You can see the acreage of it. It's very useful. And you can keep it rudimentary and just be like, yeah, there's wetlands on this property. Let me help you figure out what you can and can't do with them. Or it can be like, I want to research this. I want to protect these. You never know what some potential client might want to do. So this is a really great tool. And like I said, you can use it right on your phone, your iPad, and pull it up whenever you want. It works very well in terms of what is mapped and what isn't. So that's a great tool. And I think a good starting point for everyone in terms of what they might want to use in the future and how you can help people that you're working with make good decisions. All right. Really, my driving home points. You guys are the first point of contact for sellers and buyers, and they are entrusting you to make good decisions, right? They're entrusting you to know the ins and outs of everything that's going on and how you can benefit their future. And so having this information just gives you a lot more, in our opinion, of the knowledge of can do, how to, and can't do. Providing answers for your clients is important. And the better that you know knowledge, the better your business is, and the more useful that you can be to people. And you're building those partnerships, you're getting recommendations, you're having, someone move from New Jersey and then their friends moving down, or they're looking for a second home. So we want you to keep Wetlands in your back pocket and just be able to answer questions, because people will, as the scope is getting larger of people interested in the outdoors, I imagine that more people will start noticing these things and ask you as that first point of contact of what's really going on. So you can be prepared and, just like I said, better your business. It's really, really important. I put an image of our website up there. Again, you Google Delaware Realtors and Wetlands, it should be the first link. All sorts of great information on there for you guys, and lots of links that we've condensed down through DNREC wide. So you don't have to search and try and find things and permitting and this and that. So that's available as well. But that's really the driving home point overall. That really is all that I have in terms of me. And my email, Wes has my email, it's up there as well. If you would like to sign up for our newsletter, we produce 4 times a year, very useful information, latest and greatest of what's going on with wetlands in Delaware, and probably useful to your profession. So with that, that's the end of my presentation part. I will stop sharing my screen and we can go ahead and chat.
Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah, sure.
We do have a few questions that came through, and I'm going to kind of work backwards. Do you have a list of wetland delineators, or is that something common that people can find?
We do have a list of wetland delineators. It is on the permitting website, and I can send that to you and make sure that you have it, Wes. But it is listed on the permitting website, and there's all sorts of suggestions for contractors. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not going to I'm just going to ask the questions as they are here.
Sure.
Do you know how much it costs to cover wetlands that are authorized to build over them?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. It does vary a lot. Projects, and I use living shorelines when I get this question as a great example. Some projects can be $5,000, some projects can be $35,000. It does really vary and depend on the contractor and where you live. So I'm also talking, county by county. Beach area is a little bit more built up. We might have some more pricey items versus, up north, but I don't know the ins and outs of cost for building over them or filling them or things like that.
Okay. You may have answered this, but how can one identify forested wetlands?
Good question. I would say the best thing to do is, if you have like a gut reaction, you're like, this ground's a little bit wet, I'm not sure why. Google and go on that wetland mapping tool. That's the best way to identify them. I mean, if you want to be a hobbyist and get into identifying plants, you can do that. We have resources for that as well. Plant ID guides, you can do that route, but honestly, using the wetland tool is the best thing. Is you're not sure, look there and see if it's actually mapped. Forested wetlands can look a lot different throughout the year, and they can have different plants. It could be a puddle, it could be a pond depression. So definitely use that mapping tool as a great form to look in those forested areas. And then you can get specifics on how wet it might be throughout the year as well.
Are you able to talk at all about noxious weeds and control of them? I'm not sure that's...
That would actually be a really good webinar topic for you guys to have. There is a Delaware Invasive Species Council. That's a great tool. I think there's a noxious weed. We have workshop groups within our organization, but I would say maybe there might even be a noxious weed council. That I'm not sure on, but search around again on Google and see. But Invasive Species Council would be another presentation, especially for real estate professionals, to see what's out there and what can be on properties for sure.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's something we look into.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Just got another one. If someone wants to fill in 1/10 of an acre, do you know the requirements or how that would work, where they can find the requirements?
Great question. I will send you to the permitting department. So that if you go to our realtors webpage, we have the permitting department's number on there. And there's two great scientists that work there, and they get very specific on a certain area, so they can look up through, you know, the tax parcel and look through the actual property and let you know what the requirements are. Sorry, I keep saying I don't know. We aren't the policymakers, but they will definitely have the answers that you need, and you can call them and simply talk to them over the phone about a property.
Just so everyone knows, I put the link to the website she's referring to in the chat. We talked before we started the presentation. I'll get the slides and then I can send them out to all the participants on the call today. And we'll have it available, this recording as well as those slides, on our website. Just look for the video library at delawarerealtor.com if you want to refer back to this at all. You know, as you were making your presentation, it's interesting because our association obviously is very involved in trying to figure out solutions to, you know, the affordable housing crisis that we kind of have. So it's going to be definitely something we have to consider. You know, where's the balance with development and everything going forward. So we'll definitely be very interested in being a part of this. Well, no matter what, we'll be interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any more. I don't see any other direct messages either. If you do, if people do have questions, where can they reach you easily?
Shoot me an email. I'm always available, and I am very good at pointing people in the right direction of who to talk to. Like I said, if someone needs that permitting information, I can direct you to a direct person as well. So feel free to reach out. We're always here. We always have new information. Even if you need help going through the wetland map, give me a call and I can walk through that whole property address with you if you have someone who's really looking for specific information. So definitely shoot me an email, and we're always here. Yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. This was very informative. I hope everyone thought so too. So with that, we'll conclude. So thank you again, and everyone have a wonderful day. And I appreciate you being a part of this.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Have a good one.